Origins. The roots of history lie in the pre-human past. How long ago that was is difficult but important to grasp. If we conceive of a century in our calendar as 1 minute of a great clock that measures the passage of life, the settlement of America by white Europeans corresponds to 5 minutes before the present. 10 Christianity emerged less than 5 minutes ago. A little over an hour longer ago, humans settled in southern Mesopotamia and the earliest civilization. That is when written records begin. Humans they started writing the past less than an hour before our time. 6 or 7 hours before our time, they were the most physiognomically very similar to the human beings who settled in Western Europe. Prior to that, we had, according to the UN, about 3 weeks ago, the first creatures with human characteristics appeared. Their contribution to development is still a matter of debate. How far back in the darkness do we have to go to understand human origins? It's arguable that we should go back, but it's arguable that we should go back much further. Is worth the risk. So much has happened in this moment that, even if we cannot say for sure what has happened has shaped the future to come. In the course of human history has perpetuated many possibilities and limitations, and these have long ago, about 1.5 million years ago. It is believed that creatures with human qualities, we know that they have existed since time immemorial. Directly to our topic, even if it weren't, it's still possible for humans to stand out from other primates, the advantages and disadvantages they face as change-makers in their own time. We need to understand, in essence, this physiological and social formation has been decisive. The creature called the human being evolve by differentiating. That is, this fork in the road is the station where history begins. This is the station. The station is a place where human beings can make their own choices about the factors that surround them in the name of humanity's achievements. Is where we hope to find the first signs of positive and conscious influence. The cradle of this story is the Earth itself. In the fossils of flora and fauna, in the geographical, in shapes and geological strata, a saga hundreds of millions of years old is being told. This while the world has changed over and over again. Huge rifts open and close, coasts rose and sank, the land was covered with plants whose species had long since disappeared. All kinds of animal and plant species appeared and reproduced. Most of them disappeared, but all of these events happened very slowly. Some of them millions years, and some of them happened very quickly over centuries. These the reproducing and disappearing creatures of the 20th century, with a lifespan of a few weeks and a seasonal rhythm. The Earth is shaped as a collection of habitats that allow a wide variety of species to survive. Biological evolution with a slowness that is impossible to comprehend, inch by inch. Climate has been the most important instrument of change. 40 million years ago, the beginning of long, hot phase, just long enough before we started. During the warm phase, reptiles appeared and the continent of Australia separated from Antarctica. At that time, there were no glaciers anywhere on Earth. As the world cooled and new climatic reptiles became extinct when conditions limited their habitat, some argue that a giant asteroid falling to Earth was a crucial factor. Emergence new conditions may cause some already existing animal species to evolve, or new, and the emergence of animal species. Among these animals, 2 mil. There were also mammals, whose earliest ancestors had been found over 1 million years ago. Mammals are now inheritors of the world, or a significant part of it. Successive processes and some accidents, these species have invaded our world and evolved into mammalian species, including us. Roughly summarized, the main line of evolution was determined by astronomical cycles over millions of years. The state of the Earth changed in relation to the sun, along with climates. A whole pattern evolved thanks to repeated changes in temperature. There were extreme changes, with cooling on the one hand, and many droughts have occurred that have wiped out possible development. On the other hand, other at certain times and in certain places, extremely favorable conditions allowed species to emerge, flourish, and spread to other environments. We are interested in this very long process. The main part is very recent, in the prehistoric sense, more than 4 million years old, in a slightly shorter period of time. Afterwards, it was the first time comes a period of the fastest and most violent changes. When I say rapid, I mean we must never forget that it is a relative term. These changes years. Yet such a pace of change is very different from the millions of years of stasis in the past. Researchers have covered much of the northern hemisphere, much of Europe and the whole of North America up to present-day New York. 1.5 kilometers, covered by thick ice flows, each lasting between 50 and 100,000 years. They have spoken of ice ages. Today, the first one began more than 3 million years ago. 17 to 19 of such icings have been identified. We had a hot period following the most recent one, and that was ended about 10,000 years ago. Evidence of these glaciations and their effects, oceans and other land masses. They form the backbone of prehistoric chronology. The ice ages left these external. The measuring scale provides us with clues that we can relate to the development of humanity. Ice ages make it easier to see how climate determined life and how it affected prehistory, but it is misleading to claim that it had a dramatic direct impact. The slow thawing of the ice and the occasional, there is no doubt that his destruction of everything in his path was decisive. Most of us still live on land that the ice swept and carved thousands of years ago. We are seeing the massive floods caused by the melting and retreat of the ice are destroying the natural habitat of the creatures that have adapted themselves to the polar conditions. But these creatures have created new possibilities. Every after the glaciation, new species will move into areas that are not covered by the melting ice. Spread out, retreating to areas not directly affected by the consequences. Nevertheless, the effects of glaciation play a crucial role in the global story of evolution. Environment flood changes were followed by the thinning of ice covering thousands of kilometers, which as a result, another decisive force has emerged, both drought and grass. The emergence of covered areas has opened up new opportunities for species that had been relegated to other regions, especially those that can stand on their own 2 feet. Among these species, some of them are part of the story of human evolution, and all of the most important stages of that evolution, as far as has been observed so far, took place in Africa, beyond the ice-covered areas. If we think of the disasters caused by drought, climate is still important today. Such events affect millions of people very closely, nor is the change in the basic geography of the world and the climate-driven need for food in prehistoric times fundamental. Climate had no effect on its decisive role in where they will live has only recently become apparent. This made, and still makes, technique very important. In early times, skills such as fishing and fire-making made it possible for families lucky enough to possess such skills, or lucky enough to discover and learn them, to reach new environments, to access a variety of foods. Opportunities to collect food from different environments have made it possible to access different foods. From gathering and hunting and then to growing, has been influential. Long before the ice ages, even before the emergence of the creatures from which humanity evolved, climate set the scene, selectively shaped it and humanity's genetic inheritance. Without diving into this shallow but deepening pool of evidence, we need to take it's worth taking another look. About 5 million years ago, primitive mammals were of 2 main types. One is a rodent-like species that lives on the ground, and the other is a tree-dwelling species mammals. So the competition for food resources between these 2 families diminished, and the remaining creatures formed the species that exist on Earth today. The second group were the prosimians, the ancestors of the first primates, including our ancestors. It is important to talk about ancestry in general terms, and not to get too hung up on it. There are millions of generations and many evolutionary dead ends between us and the first apes. At least our most distant ancestors lived in trees. And it is important to know that the next stage of evolution creates possibilities for creatures that can withstand these uncertainties and the accidental challenges that occur in the forest. This environment was a factor that enhanced the capacity to learn. Survivors say that sudden and surprising were able to respond to dangers, treacherous enemies, and adapt to such an environment. Species that could not resist such conditions became extinct. Some of their limbs that evolved as fingers and eventually evolved thumbs, and that these species among those that could evolve. The first apes had three-dimensional vision. The important sense of smell also evolved. The first apes were small creatures. The tree shrews that still exist tell us about the first apes. Gives an idea of what Munsu looked like. Not to be human, they were far from being apes. But for millions of years, they made humanity possible. That made it possible for them to evolve. In this process, geography has been the key to the evolution of the first apes. Had a major impact on the relationship between different genres. Limiting the relationship between time has had an isolating effect on them, allowing them to differentiate. Change not quickly, but the environmental fragmentation caused by geographical problems and resulting isolation gradually led to the emergence of the ancestors of modern mammals to survive the winter. Among these species were the first monkeys, and there were also great apes. These species were present as far back as 35 million years ago. They hadn't been seen before. Apes and apes represent very important evolutionary steps. Both families have much higher dexterity than other predators. They have a much higher manual dexterity. Among them, those that differed in size and acrobatic skills began to evolve. At this point, physiological and psychological evolution is quite blurred. Among these, the development of three-dimensional vision, the development of behavior in ways that suggest the development of consciousness, has also increased. These creatures are perhaps the first creatures to be able to choose different colors. They were born. The brains of early primates were much more developed than those of other predators. So, in that sense, it was larger, the physical strength of one or more of these species for an animal. The automatic realization of this feature is that it is used by the animal instead of the animal, and that wherever it occurs. Was a decisive step in terms of dominance. 25 or 30 million years ago, forests dried up and declined, and competition for dwindling forest resources intensified. Covered with trees, grasses, wherever areas have been created, both environmental challenges and opportunities have arisen. Some primates not strong enough to hold on to their forest homes. Genetic qualities, they spread across the plains in search of food and faced both hardships, and they faced many opportunities. Their actions and behavior are likely to have been more like gorillas and chimpanzees than chimpanzees. Their ability to stand up and move easily on their feet meant that they could carry food between them and overcome many difficulties. This made it possible to overcome dangerous, flat, and they were able to explore the open plain, where they found resources in a safer place, to the homes they had built. While many animals consume their food where they find it, humans do not. They can use their front limbs more freely, the mobility and combat capability that comes from being able to use it in a way that provided. We don't know exactly what the first tool was, but we do know that primates are also known to pick up objects in order to deter others, and use these objects as weapons, and to find resources such as food, to get them out of the country. The next step in the debate is a very big one. It takes us back to the moment when we first encountered the biological family to which both humans and apes belong. Findings. But it's fragmentary. But it's a good indication that 15 or 16 million years ago, a highly successful species, it has spread across Africa, Europe, and Asia. In trees, this species, thought to have weighed about 20 kilograms, was not very large. Unfortunately, the evidence for this species belongs to a moment before and after this species. We have no information, but we do know that a bifurcation occurred during the evolution of primates. Came. One path led to apes and chimpanzees, the other to humans. The mistake that led to humans is called hominid. The first hominid fossils history, these have been found in Kenya and Ethiopia, is only 4.5 to 5 million years ago, so a period of about 10 million years is unknown. The major geological and geographical changes that have taken place during this period have certainly, which must have worked for or against many new models of evolution. The earliest surviving examples of hominid fossils show that during this great upheaval, at the end of the 20th century, in the vast region of eastern and southeastern Africa, mid to a species that may or may not be the ancestor of the small hominids. They belong to a family called Australopithecus. The oldest of these fossils are dated going back to 4 million years ago. In 1998, a whole skull and almost complete skeleton were found near Johannesburg, 500 million years older than these fossils, 1 million years younger. Despite the elasticity of time and the approximation of prehistoric chronology, there is no great difference between it and the date of Lucy, the most complete Australopithecus specimen found to date. Other Australopithecines found between Kenya and the Transvaal. General descriptions: this species belongs to different periods of the next 2 million years, and these have had a major impact on archaeological thought. Australopithecine's discovery, from 1970 onwards, the dates of the origins of human beings were added to the 3 million. Another year has been added. It is still unclear. The debate is still not over. But if there is a common ancestor of the human species, it is very likely to be one of the species belonging to this genus. Is a possibility. But monkeys, apes, and other creatures with human characteristics. The difficulty of determining the difference between Australopithecus and other creatures that are, at best, their peers, has become apparent. In relation to this issue, there are still many questions, and these questions are very difficult to answer. It is not yet mid, or a complete picture has not yet emerged. Discoveries are still ongoing. There are many findings about Australopithecus. Among the Rallopithecine species, there are creatures much more similar to humans. The genus Homo, the name was given to it. There is no doubt about the relationship of Homo to Australopithecus, Tur. It was definitively identified about 2 million years ago in certain parts of Africa. In the past, radioactive measurements of the remains attributed to one such person. The remains date back to 1.5 million years ago. An even larger one was found near Lake Rudolph in northern Kenya. The remains of a hominid have further confused the mind. About 1.55 centimeters tall, and this is one of the first chimpanzees with a brain twice the size of modern chimpanzees' brains. Referring to the catalog number of the remains that were removed to the Kenyan Museum, 1470 number of humans. On a topic like this, where experts are not unanimous, and where controversy is expected to continue over such fragmentary findings, all that remains is that hominid life began some 2 million years ago. It is better for non-experts not to speak definitively. Some of the characteristic features observed over more than 2 million years, we can be more or less certain that they appeared earlier. Even though Australopithecines, for example, were smaller than modern humans, we know that they have leg bones and feet that are more human-like than apes. We know that they walked on 2 legs, that they could run. We know that they could carry loads over long distances in a different way. The tips of their fingers were flat, similar to those of humans. Our species is the first of the hominid tree, even if they come from another branch. These properties, or the first, can be regarded as phases. This early stage of the genus Homo, sometimes called Homino habilis, we owe to its members the remains of the first tools. Tool use is a uniquely human, but making tools is considered a human trait. Making tools is a very important step in creating a habitable environment. Those found in Ethiopia are the oldest, dating back some 2 million years, and consist of roughly flattened stones and pebbles with sharpened ends. These stones had a purpose, and chosen for a purpose. It was deliberately used as a tool. The process of making them began. Simple cutting stones of the same type were made in later periods, will be seen everywhere throughout the ancient world of prehistory. For example, in 1 million years ago in the Jordan Valley, in Africa, prehistoric, the largest single piece of evidence for humans and their forerunners. This has provided important information about human expansion and culture. In Olduvai Bay in Tanzania, traces of the first structure have been found. This structure was built 1.9 million years ago. It is a windbreak that is made from the way the bones here are broken. Meat, marrow, and brains were apparently eaten raw. The finds at Olduvai have increased speculation. It is possible that meat and stones were brought to a place. The fact that, unlike other primate offspring, the offspring of early hominids, that they cannot hold on to their mothers comfortably during long journeys. With the findings, Olduvai perhaps believes that humans built a home base, is the first trace of a house. Among primates, only humans have houses. Houses where women and children go out foraging for food and wait for men to bring them food. Such a base also heralds the differentiation of the economic roles of men and women in society. The idea that food is a means of suppressing hunger. The fact that it is not consumed on the spot, but that the family moves to another place to meet its consumption needs, also points to a trait of forethought and planning. Eating the carcasses of dead animals, which Australopithecines are now known to do. Whether hunting has taken place or not is another question. But in Olduvai there are, since the beginning of time, it is known that the meat of large animals has been consumed. Yet such an exciting finding only provides us with small and disparate fragments of concrete facts. In East Africa, in terms of providing shelter and enabling the emergence of humanity, they cannot be assumed to be widespread findings. We know that these places existed because circumstances made it possible for them to survive and for the remains of the first hominids to be found. Even if the evidence suggests that these hominids were the true ancestors of humans, that these are human predecessors, they could also be human predecessors. Here we have the only thing that can be said is that these creatures have evolved and have developed creative behaviors that we can associate with humans. These findings demonstrate the redundancy of categories, such as ape-human or human-ape. Some researchers are now arguing that are categorical that we are not descended from Homo habilis, the first known tool-using creature. They're getting ready to say, believing that the discovery of the home base facilitated biological survival possible. These house buses offer short periods of relaxation and the possibility of illness and accidents. Made it possible to minimize and avoid the dangers it posed, but it was very decisive. But it did influence the evolutionary process in terms of physical sorting. Taken together with other advantages, this explains why, after a few million years, no trace of the genus Homo can be found outside the Americas and Australia. However, different whether a single species has spread because similar species have evolved in similar places. We do not know for sure. According to a generally accepted view, tool-making originated in Asia and India, and perhaps Europe, by migrants from East Africa. Hominids settled and survived in many different places because of their remarkable capacity to cope with changing conditions. But it was this capacity that led to the emergence of these species and their sudden migration to Africa and Asia. We don't know what the behavioral secret is that has allowed it to spread throughout the human family. No mammal outside the human family has been so successful and so widely established, a biological achievement so unique that it occupies every continent except Antarctica has not shown. The next decisive stage in human evolution was the development of the human physique, is nothing short of a revolution. After the divergence of hominids and ape-like creatures some 4 million years ago, the successful family developed a brain twice the size of Australopithecus, less than 2 million years. One of the most important phases of this process occurred at one of the most critical steps in human evolution, when the species called Homo erectus was reached. This species lived widely and successfully for 1 million years before then spread across Europe and Asia. The oldest of these species found to date, one specimen, is 500,000 years older than that, while recent findings, in Java found, indicate that specimens of this species were still living 30 to 50,000 years ago. This means that Homo erectus was much more spread over a large area, and we belong to the hominid family Homo longer than sapiens. Many findings point to an African origin. From there into Europe and Asia, Homo erectus was the first were found in these places. In addition to fossils, The presence of a special tool has helped to find out where Homo erectus did and did not spread. The stone is the famous wire axe. This tool is used for skinning large animals, and this tool, commonly referred to as an axe, it does not look like an axe, but the name has stuck. Homo erectus is a genetic product, there is no doubt about its success. When we end with Homo erectus, there is no clear dividing line. There is no such line in the prehistory of man. This fact is easily overlooked, run away, or forgotten. But according to the pioneers who are now on their feet, a creature with a brain the size of a modern human brain. While we still don't know exactly how the brain works, we do know that there is a rough correlation between size and intelligence. So it's likely that the larger brain species, and that this is a huge challenge for slow-developing human traits. We have to accept it as progress. A big brain also means a big skull, and some other changes. The pre-fertile size of females has evolved in a way that allows the pelvis to give birth to offspring with larger heads. One of the consequences of this has also been the prolongation of the growth process. The physiological evolution in the female did not make the ability to procreate possible until it was reached. Human offspring are born, needs the care of its mother for a long time after infancy. Long infancy and childhood requires dependence. It takes a long time for children to start collecting their own food. Perhaps the last example of this is the way in which today's youth are looked after and protected by society until they finish their higher education. The understanding we've seen since Homo erectus's relationship with his offspring continues to evolve. Biological change is the process of raising more offspring to ensure the continuation of the species, and gradually evolved to ensure its sustenance. In return, the divisions between male and female roles have sharpened. Women, because of motherhood as food-gathering techniques, have become more sophisticated while becoming less mobile for men to cooperate with each other. Maybe that's why. The denial is that bigger creatures need more and better food. Psychological change is also important. Dependent and long childhood has gained importance. Maybe learning and memory are becoming more and more important, and skills are becoming. This is intensified by the complex social conditions. It is precisely at this point, the mechanism of what will come forward one step later has escaped our attention. If there is such a thing, of course. We have now reached a point where the genetic program of hominids has been interfered with by learning. We're about to. In terms of evolutionary sorting here, it's a case of innate natural abilities towards tradition and culture, and ultimately, towards the development of conscious control mechanisms towards the establishment of a new society. But what exactly is this change? We can't say that it happens all the time. Another important psychological change is the loss of estrus in the female hominid. What is this? We don't know when it occurred, but after this situation was completed, the sexual rhythm of hominid is significantly different from that of other animals. Man is the only animal in which the estrus cycle, a periodic increase in the female's sexual attractiveness and receptivity, has completely disappeared. It's easy to see how this relates to prolonged childhood in an evolutionary context. If the female hominid, the severe interruptions that it requires, her offspring would have been neglected during this period, which would make it impossible for him to live. Therefore, the estrus, the selection of a genetic trait, such as giving up, is essential for the survival of the species. The process required for such a choice to occur takes 1 million to 1.5 million years, because it cannot be consciously chosen. Such a situation has had radical consequences. The increasing attractiveness and receptivity of females to males has made individual choice in terms of mating much more difficult, has become important. The rhythm of nature has become less of a factor in mate selection. Here we are just beginning the very long and uncertain road that will lead us to the idea of sexual love. We are at the very beginning. Individual mate choice combined with the offspring's dependence on the parent. As for the family, which consists of a father, mother, and offspring, and is an institution unique to human beings, as a possibility. Some have argued that incest taboos, taboos that are practically universally accepted but in which the form of prohibited relationships varies, are social men who are not sexually mature but have reached sexual adulthood could potentially. They think it is because of the dangers of being in close contact for long periods of time with women who are in a constant state of sexual receptivity. It is important to be skeptical about such issues. The evidence on this issue tells us can make little headway. What's more, it happened over a very long period of time, with very important phases in terms of physical, psychological, and technological evolution. The first specimens of Homo erectus are what some scientists believe may bear no resemblance to their last specimens, which they describe as archaic forms of the next evolutionary step. Yet all considerations suggest that the change in hominids. We believe that Homo erectus became observable when it took center stage, and that it is of great importance in describing the line of humanity as it was evolving. That Homo erectus was carrying a handgun. Homo erectus, with his hand, no matter how inadequate the tool may seem to us, it is an unprecedented, had the capacity to determine its environment in some way. Their hand axes also made it possible to observe their cultural traditions. From the late Homo erectus, we have the remains of the first dwellings built, some 15 meters long, huts made of twigs with stone or leather floors. The first worked wood, the first wooden spear, and the first carrier, a wooden vessel. The creation of such a wide variety of tools is a testament to the A level of rationality, the conceptualization of the tool to be made before starting production, and requires characteristics such as the idea of processing the material. Some take the discussion even further carried. On tools made of stone, no contribution to the intended use of the tool shapes such as triangles, ellipses, and ovals are repeated over and over again. I wonder if this is aesthetic, foreshadowed the beginning of the development of sensation. The greatest technological and cultural advance of prehistory occurred when some of these creatures learned to manipulate fire, the use of fire. The earliest findings have been found in China. They date back 300 to 500,000 years belongs. Recent research in the Transvaal has shown that many researchers' clues have emerged to convince us that hominids were using fire long before that. Homo erectus apparently never learned how to make fire, and neither did its successors. On the other hand, it is indisputable that he knew how to use fire. The importance of this information. It appears in the folklore of people who lived later, in almost every culture. There is a magical creature or hero who holds fire in his hands. This supernatural, the breakdown of order, is described as follows. According to a Greek myth, Prometheus stole fire from the gods. Based on this statement, it is possible, although not certain, that fire was first from self-burning natural gas resources or erupting volcanoes. Culturally, economically, socially, and technologically, fire is a revolutionary tool. Never mind that the prehistoric revolution lasted for thousands of years. We have to keep in mind, fire carried the possibilities of warmth and light, so it extended life in the inhabited environment to include darkness and cold. In physical terms, one of the most important consequences of this revolution was to be able to use fire. Animals were brought out of caves using fire. Perhaps this is how the seeds of the use of fire during hunting were sown. Technology could be carried even further. Spears were hardened with fire. Cooking became possible. Hard-to-digest sources such as seeds have been added to the food. Flavorless and bitter plants have been processed. This is a great contribution to the plants and their diversity. And thus, without anyone even realizing it, the science of botany, the foundations have been laid. Fire has affected the mindset much more directly, limiting and inhibiting consciousness. Fire is therefore one of the resilient factors in overcoming the obstacles to the evolutionary importance of reason. As a source of heat and light, fire has a great psychological power that it still carries today. After darkness falls, the group then gathered around the fire to watch the chaotic and hostile world outside, in the face of its existence as a small, meaningful unity. Language, which is still, we know nothing about its origins, sharpened by a new group relationship. The group itself is also structurally elaborated. At one point, the fire bearers and fire experts have emerged, great to those who carry life and death in their hands, a mysterious significance. These are the people who carry the liberating tool they had to be protected, and even became masters from time to time thanks to this power. On the other hand, this new power is one of the most, has been its great tool. Thanks to fire, the iron power of night was pierced. Climates, the disciplined nature of the ancestors, has disappeared. One of the most important, the natural rhythm that was its objective binding, has disappeared. Behavior is now routine and has ceased to be automatic. There is even a possibility of so-called leisure and rest, has emerged in a very visible way. The big hunt is one of the most important achievements of Homo erectus. The origins of this periods of scavenging that turned vegetarian hominids into both carnivores and herbivores can be traced back. Eating meat provided a concentrated protein intake, and meat eaters did not need to eat a steady diet of garbage, as many vegetarian creatures do. Prevented, allowing to save the effort spent on feeding is, instead of being consumed on the spot, the food is taken home to be saved for the following days. The transportation of the carcass of an elephant is one of the first signs of conscious self-control. According to the archaeological record at Olduvai, the carcasses of an elephant, several giraffes, and meat was consumed. But of course, the bones of smaller animals not expected to last for any length of time, so their bones were crumbled up amongst the other paintings. About 300,000 years ago, the picture was completely different. Here perhaps Australopithecus and its relatives were replaced, that the more productive Homo erectus took over. The new food has made it possible to consume more, but it has also required new environments. If meat eating became generalized, hunting must have followed. Even if hominids were more or less subsisting on other species, the discovery of territory and new settlements, especially in areas where mammoth and woolly rhino followed by its creation. Knowledge of such facts is essential, for is the teaching of knowledge to others. It's the trapping of these big beasts of antiquity. The skills required to drop, kill, and dismember are enormous in relation to their predecessors. What's more, they require cooperation. Skills, because they are skills that allow them to kill an animal in a place where they can kill it easily with fire, and plant it. The heavy creature can flounder in a swamp, fall off a cliff, may fall, so lookout points or safe platforms for hunters must be found. Besides natural traps, there are several types of weapons, and after the victim dies, other problems arise. The hunt is not only about wood, stone, and flint, and carried to the house base. Carrying the prey to the house, his move, relentlessly disrupting the environment, creating a small but ubiquitous. It implies freedom from the drudgery of foraging for the kind of food that is known. Free time, because of the food that has already been provided. It is hard not to feel that this was a critically important era. It is still the next, even if it is unbelievably slow compared to societies. Millions of the steps of evolution, of change, which had taken years, were now accelerating. Homo erectus is not a human being as we know it, but it is becoming a human-like creature. The greatest of predators rises from its cradle. A society that resembles a real society is gradually becoming noticeable. To this point, only a complex, not only through hunting, which required cooperation, but also through the transmission of acquired knowledge from generation to generation. Culture and tradition gradually developed among hominids, genetic mutation and natural selection. Groups that memorize efficient techniques will drive evolution forward. The importance of experience is very big. It is the knowledge of methods that have been successful, in modern society as it were, not experimentation and analysis. This reality in itself is an older and more has increased the importance of those with experience. They know what needs to be done and how. They know which methods should be used. House base and big game, they have found that it facilitates the maintenance of life in groups. Even the very old, they are not, because very few of them lived long enough to live beyond 40 years of age. Among these groups, it is not only those with strong memories who stand out, those who were able to wield power by speaking in time. little is known about prehistoric language. We wish modern languages emerged long after Homo erectus disappeared. Some form of communication must have been used during the Great Hunt, and all primates give meaningful signals. When did hominids first start communicating? But we don't know if they started out with a reorganization similar to that of other animals. It is plausible to suggest that they were making sounds that were suitable for communication. This made it possible to convey different messages, and perhaps this is how grammar took root. What is certain is that this great acceleration of evolution will be followed by the emergence of groups that gather experiences, practices, and skills, develop them, and elaborate ideas through language. We cannot separate processes here either. A better vision, a better ability to cope with the world by bringing different objects together, increasing physical capacity, and increasing the use of tools, things like the evolution of language over hundreds of thousands of years. These two phenomena combined to contribute to the growth of mental capacity. And eventually, one day, conceptualization became possible. Abstract thought has emerged. Still, it is a fact that nothing can be said with certainty about the behavior of pre-human hominids. Very little has been confirmed with certainty. We are moving through the fog, where creatures become more or less human-like and familiar to us. The moment is slowly emerging. We can be sure that their minds are not only aware of the outside world, one as a vehicle in no way similar to our own. And yet it's not pre-human. When we look at Homo erectus in terms of having human characteristics, it's very striking. Physically, he has a brain comparable in size to ours. It can make tools, and with those tools, it can create multiple technical traditions, build shelters, use fire to drive out the occupants of the caves and to gather its food. They hunt in a way that requires a certain discipline. Groups and tackle complex tasks with these groups. And they talk and exchange ideas. The members of these hunting groups' basic biological unions are probably the heralds of the core human family, because these unions are formed in structures such as house bus, and the segregation of the sexes is happening. In fact, there is an integrated social structure in which creatures such as fire bearers or gatherers, and those who act as the knowledge bank of the group, are supported by other members of the community. The food obtained through cooperation. It also seems necessary to have a social organization in which these things are shared. These kinds of things that pretending that there are prehistoric lines for its formation, but without these dividing lines, human history cannot be imagined. That it's no longer feasible. A brain slightly larger and more complex than others when Homo erectus evolved into Homo sapiens, a subspecies of Homo sapiens, and the inheritance was secured by his action. Whether or not you call erectus a human doesn't make much difference.